You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am very happy to welcome Joe Barnard. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, how's it going?
Yep, it's going great. How about you?
I am doing pretty well.
So, for those who might not have seen your YouTube channel, who are you? What do you do? All the details.
Sure. So, my name is Joe Barnard. I run a YouTube channel where we build model rockets. We fly them, sometimes they work, and then we usually try to figure out what happened after the fact. A bigger and bigger part of that has been machining parts for these rockets. They're getting bigger and larger and larger, and so I do a little bit of work on a mill. I do a little bit of work on a lathe, and sometimes I have to get a little creative about how that happens. But I consider myself less of like a manufacturer or a machinist, and more of someone who has machines and uses them. And sometimes it goes all right.
Yeah, no, and I think I've been trying to push the podcast out into people I think are just cool and like worth talking to and listening to. Like, I think that there's a lot of important lessons learned that you can kind of glean from your YouTube channel. And it's just cool to see that you are machining stuff too. But so let's take it back. Where did this all start? I mean, from what I've read, you kind of didn't really have any experience in rocketry or anything and just picked it all up. So where did this all start?
Yeah, it started it's about 8 years ago now. I had graduated with a degree in audio production from the Berklee College of Music, and I kind of knew for a little while that I didn't want to work in the music industry, but just wanted to complete the degree. And I had been working as a videographer, and then just had seen some stuff online that really inspired me to get into aerospace. But obviously it's expensive to go back and get a new degree. Aerospace is definitely one of those fields where you'd benefit from going to school for, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, that kind of thing. And so instead of going back to get the degree, I started this YouTube channel where I just documented my progress along the path of trying to, do some impressive projects that could stand in place of a more formal degree to get an interview at one of these companies. And it's kind of funny. Like, I started the whole project with the idea to get a job, and then the project became the job. Like, I'm doing the job now. So it's taken off, pun intended, and it is my full-time job now. We build rockets. It's supported through Patreon and sponsorships and ads and things like that. And then we make interesting videos about them.
That's excellent. Yeah. I think I stumbled across your channel just like maybe a handful of videos before you successfully landed your.
Yeah.
So where did that whole project start?
So that was the original goal. Was I thought that I could garner enough attention to get an interview somewhere. It initially started at SpaceX, and then I quickly was like, okay, I just need to get a job somewhere. But yeah, the goal was to send a little rocket up to 100 feet and then bring it back down and land it like SpaceX. So, I think most people watching have at some point seen one of those landings, and it's kind of magical, looks like sci-fi. And I figured if I could do that with a model, it would be a difficult and impressive enough project that I could get the interview. And it took 7 years to actually make it happen, which is way longer than it would take if you were just doing that. Because the other thing is that we've done all sorts of other weird little side projects along the way, and the focus on the landing has been off and on. But that's how the landing stuff came about. It was the original goal for the project. And so shifting focus, the new goal, the new big lofty thing that we're sort of slowly working toward, is the spaceshot, which is a rocket that goes above 100 kilometers and then comes back. So it doesn't stay in space, but it goes very high. It goes Mach 4, Mach 5. It's a speedy boy, and it's a really hard project. So that's our current goal.
Awesome. So talk to me about how you learned all this, because I mean, this kind of engineering is something people struggle with even when there is a formal course outline. And then to be able to teach yourself, because it's not like you're assembling rocket kits or something. You have built your own flight computer. You built your whole rocket. Where did you start?
Yeah. Well, you start by slamming a lot of things into the ground, whether you want to or not. So I would say for the first, it's all self-taught. And for the first year or so, a lot of my progress was just shooting in the dark. So I build a rocket, and I would try to cobble together some Arduino code to make it fly really well. And really, legitimately, 10 times out of 10, we had 10 flights in the first year, and every single one of them was a pretty capital F failure. And yeah, so I don't really recommend that approach. There are easy ways to do it, but a lot of it in the earlier days was trial by fire. And then eventually, you learn all of the ways that it doesn't work. There's like some Edison quote about this, right? You learn all the ways that it doesn't work. So the last possible option is that it does. And so like a year in, it started working a little bit better. The rocket started flying straighter. And that's the point where I was able to like start to piggyback off of that and succeed a little bit more. So like, and then there's other things that don't require the experience. So like PCB design, you mentioned I designed my own PCBs. That's a thing that you can just learn with like a Sunday afternoon and YouTube, which is incredible. There's a bunch of stuff that you can't, but there are plenty of areas here in terms of like the physics or writing a simulation in Python or, learning how to code in C++, writing code for microcontrollers. Like all of these things are really easily accessible online if you have like a little patience and you're willing to sort of self-direct your path through it. And then so building stuff that is way more complicated now than what I started with. And I think it's probably worth noting too, a lot of what I've learned has come from other people, like finding people who are in the field, finding people who have done these things before, and just sending a bunch of emails out like, please, can I buy you lunch and like pick your brain about this? That stuff has gone a pretty long way too, of finding a mentor or a person to give you a little bit of guidance.
So yeah, let's touch on that. What tips do you have on finding a mentor? Because I mean, you can reach out to a bunch of people, but finding somebody who fits your learning style and you can collaborate with, I think, is really important in a mentor. You can't just, oh, he's the smartest person in the field, that's the person I
Yeah.
want to talk to. If you can't receive his information, it's useless. So what have you
Yeah.
learned about finding a mentor? Because you've done some really dangerous things too. You recently had that video on mixing your own propellant and all of that, and that's not something you want to do on your own from a
Yeah.
YouTube video.
Yeah, I tried really hard to emphasize that. I'm sure you saw in the video, I think like 5 or 6 times. I'm like, if this is the only thing you're watching, you are not getting enough information to do it yourself.
Right.
But yeah, no, the mentorship stuff is really important. And it's frustrating because a lot of my really good like peers or mentors, people that I learned from, came about organically. So it's frustrating, if you're getting into it to be like, where do I look? But yeah, I finding people who you can learn from, not necessarily the smartest person in the room, was a great point that you made there too. I have a buddy of mine who I've worked with a lot at this point now. His name's Brian Douglas, and he does these control systems lectures on YouTube. And like he's a very smart engineer. He's really good at what he does. He's also been a really strong mentor to me for the last few years. And the thing that like is way more powerful than him being knowledgeable in the field or anything like that is that he is a phenomenal teacher. And I think that makes a big difference, even if you are not the smartest person in the room or whatever. And I don't say that to discredit him. He's just like far and away the best type of teacher, where it's like you want someone who never makes you feel bad for not knowing things. If you're an apprentice to someone else, you want to feel like you're helping. And I think like finding someone who is really excited to help a younger person learn is is helpful. And so when you ask like where do you find these mentors, I can speak for rocketry specifically, which is not
I
as
know that I have
helpful.
quite a few listeners who were all in rocketry in high school and in college, so I'm sure they'd love to hear where you found yours.
Yeah, I would strongly suggest signing up for Tripoli or NAR, so that's National Association of Rocketry, and finding a little club near you. There are like most places in the country that you're within like a 1 or 2 hour drive of a club that meets up maybe bi-monthly or monthly. And those in-person meetups are really valuable because there's going to be plenty of people there. A lot of these older folks who like don't have like a crazy big online presence, but they know a lot, will be at those launches. And that's a great place to find people who can point you in the right direction. And yeah, I mean, apart from that, I have met some great people online as well. But those in-person events are kind of I feel like they're a great breeding ground for finding someone to help you.
Awesome. Did you find the rocketry community hard to break into because so many of these people have been doing it, since high school and have been friends since then and things like that?
I go both ways on it. There were definitely parts where like I can remember a lot of parts trying to get into my local club back when I was in Boston, where I felt like really welcomed in, and like I felt like these folks just wanted to help. And then I also felt like, some of them were not necessarily gatekeeping or anything like that, but I've seen it go both ways. And I think it, sort of at the mercy of the person you're trying to talk to. Um, yeah, so I don't think I have a super solid answer on like it was easy or it was hard. Um, yeah, I think probably follows the same type of thing of like finding someone who's really friendly and like has a sort of innate desire to help.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you're on a machining podcast. We are probably the kings of gatekeeping. So, it's totally fine. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can understand it. It's very dependent on who you find.
Mhm.
Let's talk about failure.
Let's do it.
Because I think that it's super commendable how much you share, like how much failure you share, because it seems, like you said, the Thomas Edison quote of like failing thousands of times to find the one way that it works.
Mhm.
How have you dealt with just continual failure, especially when you're investing all this time and money? How have you tempered your expectations for every test? What have you learned about dealing with failure and to arrive at success throughout this whole project?
Yeah, I love talking about this stuff for what it's worth. I have gotten a lot better about it in like the last few years, but I used to put a lot of self-worth in the result of tests and things that I do. And like I imagine the same is true for like people who are getting into machining or metalworking, and you if your part breaks or you break a bit off and you ruin the whole part and you have to start from scratch, like that is a big ego hit, right? And so over the last few years, it's definitely gotten better. And I think it's mostly just practice. Like, I think you get to, once you just like screw it up enough times, you kind of have to evolve. Like, you kind of have to not get back in, like, it like forces your mind to like not get super down about it because it's happened so many times before that whenever something doesn't work, so like I can speak specifically for launches, like there are plenty of flights that I do that do not work. I talk a lot publicly about failure, but it's also because boy, there's plenty of it to go around. um
Yeah, well, I mean, your most recent video, the EBDB,
yeah.
like what I love is that you very easily seem to find the silver lining in many of these failures. You're like, oh yeah, lost the second stage, but hey man, we hit like over Mach 3. Like
Yeah, it's
and
crazy, it's super fast.
yeah, yeah.
And that was actually the day, like that launch was a great day to like I hadn't really thought about failure in a while. And then I realized leaving the desert, hours later after getting sunburned and we're just like combing through the desert for rocket debris. I realized after that, like, wow, I don't have any disappointment about this thing failing. And I really think it's just practice, which is a sucky answer because it means that you can't just like have one thing and then not have failure affect you. But it's really normal. It's also, I think, probably talking to people who have done what you want to do for a long time, they will necessarily have had like a bunch of failures too. And that normalization of it, like, it stings a lot less for me now when something doesn't work because I also can think of, you know, tons of other people that I know who have had these really big like egg on their face moments, like just fall on your face failure kind of thing. And so it's easier for me to be fine about it because I know it happens to everyone. And I think maybe if you're getting into it, or if you're a little bit more new in a field, you don't see that stuff as much. You haven't had as many conversations with people who are like, oh God, I can't believe this one time I screwed this thing up. Like, find someone who's scrapped like a $500,000 part and like you'll feel a lot better about, about
Right.
whatever's not working.
So, what about other data that you collect? Because you have all this data from the flight computers, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Are you writing down lessons that you're learning? Because I would imagine, you blow up a rocket, and it's hard to not just say like, "Oh, I've screwed everything up," and forget
Yeah.
the lessons and the successes that you had in there that you can use on your next one.
Yeah. I probably should be writing this stuff down. I'm not. I'm
I mean, I guess you have
documented. Yeah.
videos, like
Yeah, that's my justification. I kind of wish sometimes that I had a blog because it's easier to reference information through like text. But yeah, it's all documented in video. I try to include all of the parts of, the things that we learn and what we don't. Like in that same video that you were referencing, there's this sort of byline in the story about how I used like Kevlar string or Kevlar rope to attach two parts of the rocket, and it was like rated to 500 pounds. I looked at this little 2-inch rocket and I was like, "There's no way that this won't work," and it completely did not work. And it actually doesn't even matter for the story of the video. Like for the story of the video, it's just deeply unimportant that the line snapped because everything else failed so hard that it's like there was no chance anyway. But keeping that in the video is sort of a decision of like I want to make sure that I'm documenting all the things that didn't work so that I can reference them later and be like, "Oh, right. Even if everything else had worked, that was still going to fail." And so that's like a lesson to keep as I go forward.
that's one thing I love in your storytelling in your videos is you very often are like, I'm sure this is never going to be an issue, foreshadowing like, and it's always nice that you highlight those mistakes early on in the video, and then we see later on like, oh yep, that's the problem, or like when you were testing your motor and it was leaking water through one of the
Yeah.
things you didn't tighten enough. And yeah, it's a good joke, a good bit, and
Yeah.
it's always cool to see that you highlight those things.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a fun anecdote
Yes, please.
in this, actually that's like very appropriate for the podcast too. So assume you've seen the videos that I've made where I've been like making this motor and I use like a considerable amount of the blue tape work holding technique, right?
Yes, I wanted to definitely get to that. We have one of the
We have a
listener
question about
questions from Zach Messner. He asked, "Why is blue tape the ultimate work holding solution?"
Well, yeah. So in talking about failure and in talking about what you show online, I will admit to some juicy hot gossip, which is that I actually the blue tape work holding method in the video where I make the forward closure, I put it down using blue tape and I turned the mist coolant on. And the mist coolant seeped into the blue tape. This was the first attempt that I had made using this strategy. It had seeped into the blue tape, and about halfway through the part, the half-inch end mill like sunk its teeth into the aluminum and whipped it around the whole
Oh
mill.
no!
And it like if you look really close on the forward closure, you can see there's like these big bite marks out of it. And it was fine, you recenter it, put it down, and just go a little slower on the toolpath. But that type of thing, like it's interesting because I didn't put that in the video. I like deliberately avoided talking about it. And that was more for comedic value of being like, I'm able to get away with this stupid strategy. But yeah, just to like, I don't show every single failure, but that one felt like it was better to, it's better to not.
Well, 2 points there. We use that work holding
Yeah.
strategy all the time in a professional shop. Like, two, use powder coat tape.
Oh, really?
Oh, night and day difference. It's
I think I might already be doing that. It's like
the
it's like
green
rough.
tape.
Oh, the green tape. No.
Oh, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It's not a fabric based tape, so it won't capillary action in coolant underneath it. It works heaps better, and it's much more consistent thickness too.
Cool. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Let's talk about your intro into machining and manufacturing. What made you pick it up? How did you go about it? Again, where'd you learn it all? Mishaps, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So I started with a little, what is it, a Nomad 883. It's like a little desktop mill.
Mhm.
I got it in 2019, maybe 2020. No, it had to be 2019. And yeah, it was just this little desktop mill. And I was flying totally blind. I was trying to pull like feeds and speeds from NYC CNC, but like this is a mill that has, I think like zero point 0.1 horsepower or something. Like it's
Right. It's a 3D printer with a tiny little motor on it. Yeah.
Right. And like no shame to the folks who built the Nomad. It does what it does. It's just not really meant to cut metal. Like you should be cutting Delrin or like plastic stuff like that on it. But yeah, I had that for a little while, and so I always viewed machining as this really big, complicated, and like kind of pain in the ass process because dealing with that machine cutting metal was always like a nightmare. And again, like no shade. They actually sent that to me for free. So I want to be clear that like I'm grateful for that. But then I got a Tormach 440 at the beginning of last year in 2022, and worked with Tormach on it. And first of all, Tormach was great to work with. They are really cool people that always pick up and are down to like help out. But the 440 is like this little tiny mill that I'm sure everyone who's listening is like aware of what it is. And even with like this smaller type of machine by regular machining standards, it was such a large jump up for me that it like opened all of these doors of like, wait a minute, I can make a lot of parts with this, and it's not awful to sit there for 8 hours as the machine just screams through with a eighth inch end mill. And yeah, so that opened the door for a lot of interesting parts because I had already been starting to build larger rockets. So there's like different scales of rocketry, and a lot of the larger stuff you are thinking more about FEA through the part, or like a 3D printed plastic part doesn't quite cut it on the loads that it needs to have. So it worked out well timing wise. And so the 440 was like, I would consider more of my intro to machining. Again, lots of NYCCNC videos, but turns out like they're way more geared toward machines like that. So that worked pretty well. And then, and then I got a lathe last fall. I bought, I feel like a lot of people do this, got a little eBay lathe. And that thing was awesome. It's still amazing, and it's worth every single penny. It's just not that many pennies is the problem.
Yeah, you've done some things on it that sketch me out, like, or not sketch me out, but like are definitely pushing the limits of that machine. Like you've been turning some stuff this size that I'm like, oof, okay. Like you had to turn that spud on. I don't remember what part it was, but part of your rocket, to fit it in the chuck. And then you were able to, fit it and turn it. I was like, oh man, yeah, that's pushing the limits.
Oh yeah. I had to put it using blue tape. I put it on the Tormach first, and then I hogged out like a pocket so that I could grab onto it with the lathe. I don't know. I mean, there's some operations where it's like, it would be better if I could just do the whole thing on the Tormach. But I am getting a new lathe soon, actually. So I'm gonna get a 1440 from Precision Matthews.
Awesome.
And that's going to be, I'm anticipating it being like the upgrade with the mill too, where it doesn't even matter what the new machine is. Anything is going to be night and day compared to that.
Awesome. Yeah. That'll be, literally night and day.
Yeah. To sort of answer the original question, like my intro to machining, I post all of the stuff that I do online pretty much. Right. And, at least in the earlier days too, like I used to put on a camera and just like start a live stream and let it roll. And that was actually really helpful because a lot of the machining stuff I'm doing alone. I'm not working in a shop with other people. So having people, and sometimes they don't do it so nicely, but like you try to just get the pure information out of it. Having people provide feedback on like, hey, you should consider doing it this way. Like when I got the 440, I didn't realize that the flood coolant needed to be diluted, or the mist coolant needed to be diluted. And so it was like just like oozing out of the mist coolant. And someone commented on a video, and he was like, hey, it seems like you haven't figured this out, but like you got to go 18-1 dilution on that bad boy. And so stuff like that has helped a lot. Where I mess up, people will see it and then they will tell me that I'm wrong, and you can solve it from there.
That's kind of cool. I mean, that's definitely not the usual way of learning something, crowdsourcing your information like that, but it seems like it's working. I mean, you've made some parts that I assumed you had at least some background, at a makerspace or at school or something, making parts, because those are not the kind of parts I would have started off with, or that I didn't start off with.
It's some of them are quite sketchy. Some of my work holding is sketchy. Usually that's where the sketchy happens. And then I also feel like I still just feeds and speeds are pretty alien to me. I have like a couple of templates in Fusion Cam that work okay, and then I just sort of like ride the velocity slider on the mill.
How much do you use Fusion versus Onshape?
So I use Onshape for all my CAD stuff right now. I've gone back and forth between them a couple of times, and I'm very partial to Onshape. That currently they're sponsoring the channel, so like that's probably good to disclose. But I also am really partial to them because when I lived in Boston and there was no popularity on the channel. They were like, oh, you're really cool. You should come see us. So they invited me to their headquarters, and when I walked in, they were playing Rocket Man, like the song, and it like sold me completely on the company. And so I really like Onshape, and it has a lot more to do with the people than the specific product. But I have done Fusion for cam stuff for a while, and so like sometimes I'll do CAD in Fusion, and that makes the integration into cam pretty seamless. But you can also just export parts and bring it into Fusion.
Right.
I haven't tried like Mastercam or any of those other ones, and Fusion definitely has its ups and downs. But yeah.
Okay. Was wondering how much of that was sponsorship versus actually liking Onshape, because I've never tried it, but I've heard mixed things.
Yeah, it's still it's still a growing platform. So like they don't have a solid solution for cam right now, which is it would make my workflow a lot easier if they did. But I also kind of feel like it kind of doesn't matter exactly which tool you use, so long as you're good at using it. So if you're stuck in some like really old cam software or whatever, but you can play it like a wizard, like it kind of doesn't matter so long as you know how to use it.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, I've talked about it a few times on the channel with different guests of how more or less everything does the same thing. Like you just have to find what they call it. Fusion's like press pull, and it's like, oh, extrude in something else, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we can get into some of the listener questions. Tux Garage asked, biggest thing you've shot to space, and then is a shorter or longer rocket better? Yes, this is a loaded question.
Okay. So I have only put one thing in space, and I haven't actually put it in space. I got to ride along as a payload on a flight this spring from a company called Evolution.Space. And man, I should get you in touch with their machinist. He's so cool. He would be good on the podcast. But they fly these huge rockets. I mean, it's like a 900,000-pound rocket.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah. And so they flew to, I think off the top of my head, it was like 124 kilometers. And I got to put my little flight computer on there as a payload. Now, the rocket, did not did not do what I would call survive the landing, but it was cool to like put something up there. That was pretty interesting, but I haven't personally put anything in space. That's sort of my next like 2 to 3 year journey of trying to build something that can go there. And
Did the data survive?
Yes and no. That's also a complicated question to answer. I pulled off this like Herculean effort to recover the data, and it didn't quite work. There will be a video about this on the channel at some point, but I think we're going to go for like the redemption arc with this video. So like we'll address like what happened in the first flight, and then we'll try to fly it again, come back with a full swing and a hit on getting it to space and getting it back. And then it makes a much more compelling video. So like anyway, and then for longer or shorter rocket better, it's really more about your position of your center of mass and your center of pressure. And so sort of by default, longer is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, you brought up something. Just remember what my question was. So you were talking about how Onshape helped you when you were a smaller company, or, a smaller YouTube channel. How has it been growing a channel and seeing, your access to sponsorships and opportunities? How has that been, kind of managing, I guess, stardom, or like however you want to phrase it, but like becoming a more well-known name?
Sure. Honestly, it hasn't felt that different. And I think it's mostly because I don't feel like the community that I am like most of the people who watch my videos boy, I don't know quite how to answer this question. I guess for the sponsorship side of it, the sponsorships have unlocked tons of like really incredible opportunities. So like getting the 440 from Tormach was a sponsorship deal. I put a video on their channel and like made a video of my experience setting it up, and they were like, great, well, we'll provide you this machine in order to do that. And like, that's just stupid generous, right? And that's an opportunity that I wouldn't have been afforded without the like larger platform. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that totally.
Well, maybe just to touch on the sponsorship stuff, how has it been to navigate that? Because, there's all these streaming services popping up like Nebula, because sponsorship for creators is such a murky water.
Yeah.
So where did you learn to navigate that stuff? Like it's hard to value yourself when you have no idea what any of these brand deals are worth.
I can definitely answer that. Yeah. It's most people are drastically undervaluing what they should be charging for sponsorships or negotiating for sponsorships, and it's really really hard to do. Like, it's so hard to show up if you haven't done it before and be like, I want X, because it's really scary. You kind of like, I think the fear in my head personally is when I say I want some big number for some big project, that the company comes back at, like, laughing, and they're like, you cannot possibly be serious. And so far that's never happened. Most people are pretty nice and they're like, oh, that's not in our budget, no problem. But yeah, like, I would say that it does not hurt to ask for what you want or what you would be excited to do the project for. I also don't do a lot of the negotiation for my deals. So I work with an agency called Concurrent, and they manage a lot of the relationships with larger brands. So, like, doing an ad for a company that's like a monthly learning course, or like I'm trying to think of what else. Like, I haven't done
Well, like you
anything
just did
for
the one for Insta360 was your last
right.
video.
Yeah. And having a company on your side helps a lot because you're sort of stronger in numbers. Like, you can really easily be undervalued if you're just operating on your own. And the company's not going to like take advantage of that with malice, but it does make it a lot easier if you work with an agency. A, because I don't want to spend the time negotiating deals. I find it stressful and I just like don't want to think about it. But B, the agency will have a lot more pull power to A, work with brands, and B, try to get you an industry fair rate.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was you had the whole video, I think it was in the end of 2020, about taking a step back
Mhm.
because you wanted to improve your mental health and all of that. A, what did you do
Yep.
to come back? Because you came back like 6 weeks later, which
Yeah.
I don't think that many people, you watch that first video and you're like, he might be gone for 6 months. He might be gone
Yeah,
for a
that's what
year.
I
I don't
thought.
know.
Yeah.
And then it was like 6 weeks and you're like, yeah, I'm jazzed about rocketry again. So what did you do to recover? And then what were the warning signs and things you think you could have done to prevent that kind of burnout in the first place?
Yeah, the full story of that did not really get put in the video, which is that I went through like a pretty painful breakup right around that time, and that was like the straw that broke the camel's back of me being like, okay, fuck this. Like, I
Okay.
hate everything.
Yeah, that makes more sense for sure.
But yeah, no, it was a way quicker recovery than I thought it was going to be. So I realized in like late December 2020, I was like, the way, apart from all of the other personal life stuff that was going on, like, the way that I'm approaching my work is really unsustainable. Like, you're pulling late nights and you're like saying no to a lot of like family gatherings and friend gatherings and stuff like that. And boy, that does not work over time. And I mostly just focused on not doing things that I didn't feel like were fun. So I had a series of videos on the channel early on called Landing Model Rockets, and the whole goal was to build a series of videos that were like a tutorial. And those videos really got like very unfun to make toward the end. Like, there have been a couple of times in the course of the project where I felt like the job has drifted away from me. So, like, initially before the YouTube channel, we sold these products. We sold these like thrust vector control kits. So you would add like a little flight computer and a couple of mechanics to your rocket, and it would steer itself. And producing those kits was a nightmare. It was like grueling, and my whole job became being a manufacturing engineer, which now realize on this podcast, like, maybe some of you are and you enjoy it, but like, good for you if you can. But I didn't enjoy it, and I like, that's the thing that I think led to burnout for me a lot more. Is I think there's two things. One was having your job drift away from you, so that the thing that you're doing is not really the thing that you signed up to do. Like, I signed up to build fun projects and show them on the channel. And when that, like, the times that has drifted away, that's usually what triggers burnout. And then the other thing too is, I think burnout is a little bit less about how hard you work and a little bit more about how much success you see in that work. So, like, if you are pounding the pavement and everything you do fails, I feel like you're going to burn out a lot. Me personally, I'll burn out a lot quicker than if I'm like succeeding but working like crazy. And I think momentum is sort of the key there.
Well, so what have you changed about your workflow to prevent that? Do you say no to certain opportunities to make sure that you're protecting that fun in it, or
Yeah.
how have you structured it?
Yeah, I say no to a lot more. And like, my this isn't in a way to brag. It just is sort of the reality of the situation. Like my inbox is full of like a bunch of people who are like, "Hey, do you want to collaborate?" And most of them, they just are interested in like building cool stuff, which me too. Uh, But it's really hard to say no to some of that stuff. But I also am like way happier and it's way more sustainable because of it. I hope I never have to make another one of those burnout videos. That was like, it's not fun.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like what's changed, I say no more. And honestly, like physical exercise, it's a big deal. It like I just need to like tap into my monkey brain that like gets happy when I am doing physical exercise. And that fixes surprising amount of problems for me.
I think it really does. And it's one of those things that nobody wants to hear. You're like, no, 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 I want the easy fix. I don't
Oh
want to
God.
work out. Like,
It makes me so mad too. Like horrible that it turns out physical exercise does actually work.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
so,
then honestly, like a lot of the time that just turns out to be like going on walks and stuff, like very achievable things. But
right.
anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so are you doing projects outside of YouTube or something to keep? I've talked to a lot of people who do have burnout, and it seems like they end up going back to like, I do projects outside of work or in other forms. Like I know you had a YouTube music channel for the longest time where
Yeah.
we're writing and producing songs. By the way, I had never heard any of them. I didn't even know it existed. And then I was looking up your name for a picture to use for the Patreon post. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And I found it. They're good. Like, so
Thanks.
did you go back to music? Like, what other things have you brought back into your life or continue to do more of to kind of supplement rocketry 24/7?
Music has been really helpful. I think that I would really benefit from doing more of that creative stuff in order to stave off burnout. I have a good friend, Zyla Foxlin, who she's similar maker person, but she's more of a like woodworking type of YouTube channel. And she does a lot of personal projects for herself that never make it to the channel that like is sort of her way of avoiding burnout of like, I'm going to make something just for me and it's not going to be a job because no one else is going to see it. And I'm trying to think. I think she made like a mandolin recently that just was like for her,
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, it's really cool. But I think that's a great way to navigate that type of like a lack of energy for your work is finding something where there is no right answer. Like there's no right answer for how you write a song or how you like build a home project and stuff like that. But I think honestly for me too, as I get older, like I'm turning 30 this year, I also just like don't have the energy to stay up working till 2 a.m. 5 nights a week. It definitely happens more than I want, but like my age
You
is starting to force me to not work as hard.
right, you feel it the next day. It's not like, all right,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
bounced back. I'm ready to go. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, I screwed up yesterday and I'm gonna feel it today.
Yep, yep. That's the reality. It's like a happy accident, I guess, that my body's like, you cannot keep doing this, buddy.
So going back to like listener questions, speaking of opportunities that you've gotten as you've grown bigger, Yeti Man, who's Jeff Tiedekin,
Yeah.
just recently got to do a collab with Astronis.
Yeah, yeah.
And he
Jeff
was
is
asked,
awesome, by the
yeah,
way. He's so knowledgeable on all that stuff.
yeah. So he asked, how come you cut out all of the parts of me picking on you in the last video? And I just wanted to kind of hear about the experience too of getting to film a collab like that with such a bigger company.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is, howdy, Jeff. If I could have, I would have spent the whole day in that machine shop just trying to like learn as much as I could. It was really interesting. There's all this stuff that didn't make into the video about how they were talking about how they do work holding and they've got this like little tiny vise that grips the parts and they talk about like the torque that they have to use on it. But yeah, so Jeff is great. But the whole collab with Astronis was kind of wild to me that happened at all. I just like never thought that a company would be that interested in it. And they seemed pretty happy, like hopefully gonna, do some stuff together in the future. But yeah, I also felt like it was kind of a new type of video for the channel. And so it was a little bit weird to go into that environment and pretend that I am someone that I'm not. Like I felt like my goal was like to pretend to be smarter every day. Like that YouTube channel, he'll go around, like he just did a whole series on how film gets made. And so he tours the Kodak factory. And it's like you're sort of more of like an interviewer than like a presenter. I don't know. I've sort of lost track of the question. But
Just how did that even come about? Did you reach out to them or?
oh yeah, it was a mutual friend. This is actually how like so much of all work in human life gets done is like a friend of a friend, right? That's like it's I think they call it like the strength of weak ties. Like having weak ties to a lot of people is huge.
I like
So
that.
I have a friend who is now at SpaceX, and his friend worked at Astronis or still works at Astronis. And so the guy at SpaceX was like, "Hey, my buddy is interested in like talking to you about doing a collab with Astronis." And so I got like contact info from there, and it was a really long process. Like we started the collaboration like talk back in September, so it's been almost a year, and it just took a long time to come about. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough like how many opportunities have come from happening to know someone who I knew in high school, and then their buddy's buddy wanted to do something or whatever. Uh, yeah,
That's super cool. Moria Manufacturing, Easton asked, when are you going to start selling the tiny flight computer you designed so he can make a new 38 millimeter minimum diameter that flies on an L800 that he doesn't lose this time?
First of all, that sounds tough. So I made this little tiny dual deploy computer. A dual deploy computer basically deploys two things from your rocket. It'll deploy a parachute at apogee at the peak of flight called a drogue parachute, and then it deploys a larger one once you get close to the ground called a main parachute. And these computers are like all over hobby rocketry. And I made one because I was like, okay, well, I make these other computers. I should just make a product. And as I made it, I was like, you know what sounds awful is shipping a ton of these things out constantly, doing customer support and like all of the things associated with that. And then also, when someone loses a rocket, they're usually losing upwards of $1,000 of work. And that, especially in like hobby fields, cannot be understated. Like if my bad flight computer is the result is responsible for someone losing that really sucks. So I don't think I'm gonna sell that computer anytime soon. But yeah.
That's a fair answer. Yeah, I never really thought about the responsibility you have, like selling something like that. Like, oh yeah, I could be responsible for an entire rocket just disappearing.
Yeah,
That
and
would really suck.
it's not even just like, oh, maybe I route this PCB incorrectly. It can also just be like, I'm not a professional writer of instructions. So like if you're not clear about here's how you operate this device, like user error is what a lot of these rockets end up running into for failure.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Aussie Machinist asked, if you had an unlimited budget, what machines would you buy for your workshop?
Um Honestly, it's less about budget and it's more about space, which is a weird place to come from. It's not to say that I'm like ready to drop like 100 grand on anything, but like, yeah, I kind of wish I had like a 5 car garage, and I'm just operating out of this like non-air conditioned place right now. So like I would go like a little bigger than the 440, the 770, or one of the MX machines. Look pretty good, and it's mostly just about expanding the work envelope. I don't care about the rigid tapping and all that stuff. But and then I am getting a new lathe, which is going to take up a bunch of space. But I don't know that I would want the lathe is manual. I don't know that I would want a CNC lathe. I don't really have use for machines beyond like basic entry level machinist stuff, I think. Um, and it's not that I'm not making a lot of parts, it's that they're all so bespoke and they're so weird. Like we're not doing production machining where we're making 20 parts, where most of these parts just have to get made once. Um, I also kind of wish that I had started with a Bridgeport. I wish I had started with a manual mill. And if I had to guess, that would be the advice that like you give entry level machinists is like start with a manual mill. But yeah, that would have been helpful.
Yeah, well, and just for awkward holes and things like
Hmm.
that, being able to tilt the head is very nice.
Right, right.
But no, I think that's probably the most realistic answer I've ever gotten to that question. You're not the first one to be asked that on the show, and usually it's like, oh, I'll buy a Kern or I'll buy $1 million machine, not like, yeah, I want the Tormach 2 steps up from mine. So
Yeah, like I don't know. Going back to Astronis, like they've got these crazy. What is it? Starts with an M.
Matsuras.
Yeah, they've got these crazy Matsurs. They've got a VF6. They've got like all these massive machines. And I look at those and like sweat a little bit because I'm like, if I were one machinist, like I just could not operate this thing. It's so, because having a machine that big is also way more of a chore. I can just like turn the 440 on and go. And I think for something like that, you're thinking of like warming up the spindle and like doing all sorts of other things. Um, yeah,
Well, whatever you do, do not machine graphite on your new lathe,
yeah,
because
I
you want
promise
to
I
talk
won't.
about internet hate, you will get much hate.
Okay, it's actually very validating to hear that too, because I said this in a video. I was like, I used my little lathe, my eBay lathe outside to machine graphite, and I tried to suck up all the dust and all that. And I mentioned it's because graphite is an abrasive material, like graphite dust is. Am I wrong on that?
No, not at all. There
Cool.
are shops that I know of that machine graphite electrodes for
Yeah.
EDM,
Hmm.
and a few of them use just like off the shelf Haas, and they have to replace a large majority of the linear ways and stuff like that
Yep.
once a year because it just gets eaten up. Like you can buy
Yeah.
machines that are made for that kind of machining that are completely sealed, but yeah, for the most part, it's incredibly abrasive.
So, okay, it's very validating to hear, because I published that video and everyone and their mom commented and was like, "You know that graphite is actually a lubricant. Like there's graphite lubricant." I was like, "Yes, I know that. It just also is a dust if it's not suspended in like some type of substrate or whatever." Like,
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
whatever.
it's it's not good.
Yeah. I'm keeping the eBay lathe for the graphite.
There you go. Yeah. Machining outside looked very nice,
Oh, it's
very
beautiful.
atypical.
If I could start a machine shop, I would try to find a way to like do it outside. It's like this very weird, like one with nature experience to roll your little lathe outside and like spend a day in the sun.
Totally. Yeah. It's the dichotomy of being in nature while doing something
Yeah.
completely non natural.
Yeah.
It's very cool. Let's see. Packable asked, he said, been a long time follower of BPS, 5 or 6 years, ever since his rocketry days in college. Several years ago, if he recalls properly, he remembers hearing or watching you talk about some real offers from aerospace companies that wanted to recruit you. Assuming he had recalled this correctly, he's curious why or what made you decide to continue on the YouTube channel instead of going to work for a company like that.
Well, fortunately, I am not as smart as I needed to be to get some of those jobs, because I went through the interview process for a job at SpaceX in like 2018 or 2019. And I was very excited about it. It was for a job on the Octograbber team. So like there's this little robot that comes out and grabs the rocket once it's landed on the drone ship to sort of anchor it down. And that felt like a really great fit for me. And so I made it through like 3 or 4 rounds of phone interviews. And I think I was on the one that was supposed to be like right before when they fly you out for the in-person interview. And I definitely failed the technical exam. I got asked a bunch of like really weird esoteric questions where I think they're trying to figure out like, how do you approach problem solving? And I think I failed that part. So, I didn't really have the opportunity to move further than that. But I got offered an internship at Firefly Aerospace like pretty early on, and that was going to require me to move to Texas, to like the middle of nowhere, and work on rockets like that weren't my own. And it was just starting to work where I could like barely pay my rent working on my own rockets. And I was like, all right, well, one of these is way more satisfying than the other. And so at this point, like, I'm really happy just doing what I'm doing. And it's not to say that I wouldn't be happy at a company too, but it sort of feels like, well, I've been given this ridiculous opportunity to build this stuff and see how far it can go. And I feel like I would be wasting that opportunity to not just, see how far it can go.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, it was right at the point that you were realizing you could do this full time.
Yeah.
How did you make that leap? And, was it literally just a leap into like, well, I hope this works out? Or, how'd that all go?
I did it the wrong way, and I don't recommend doing it the way that I did, which is that I moved like several state. I moved like 1,000 miles away to a completely new state with like very few job prospects. I did have a lot of friends around, and that was my goal, was to be like, okay, cool. Well, I'll move near a bunch of friends, and if I can't find a job and I run out of money, I can just like crash on someone's couch for a little while. But I should have. I was filming wedding videos as a job at the time, and I should have kept filming more of them, because I made the transition much harder for myself by trying to do that like leap into the dark and make it work. So like I had a little bit saved up in my savings account, moved it all to checking, and just like got up every day and worked as hard as I could to like build this little product and shoot tutorial video about it and all of that. And it ended up barely working. But I also sat with like an appreciable amount of credit card debt for like a little while because of it, and I don't recommend doing that. Uh, if you can find a job like shooting weddings is awesome too, because it's low hours and high pay. So like for the hours that you put in, they're very stressful. It is like not that much fun, but it means you have a lot of free time, and that helped a lot. But I would say like try to taper it. I would not try to make like a big leap into the dark to do content creation before it's working.
Okay. So that brings up two questions. One, how do you make sure that you're still having fun then now that this is your job? Like, I imagine there are some days that you just don't want to do it and you just like, I got to get this video out. I think every YouTube channel or creator that I've ever spoken to or even watched their channel has talked about like, shoot, I got a video due in 2 weeks and I've just got to bust this out and this sucks. So, how much of that is still there? And then how do you get around that?
I've definitely heard the thing that you mentioned, which is like other people do YouTube videos who are like, I can't, I have so much work to do and I'm totally swamped. And I just can't get myself to that point anymore. Like I can't, I don't feel, boy, how do I articulate this? I don't feel dread for any part of my job, really. I feel there's stuff that I don't want to do, but I blows me away that any of this works at all, to the point where like something will go wrong or it'll be stupid or I'll scrap a part or whatever and be like, this is a load of BS, and I am really frustrated about it. And it's a pretty quick switch to remembering that like I have a job where I can like wake up and pretty much do what I want and make videos about it. And like, so I feel like I sort of force myself to not get there because it feels like I'm just being ungrateful. But
That's awesome.
yeah, and that's not, I don't think, like really great advice for everyone all over the place.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask about is, so you have a background in videography.
Mm-hmm.
What can you teach us about storytelling? Because I think you do a great job of bringing people into your videos. Like that's why I continue to watch. Like I watched one and I was like, oh, the concept is really cool, but I don't know if that would have hooked me long term. But you tell such a good story and you've got, little bits in there that are really funny. So what have you learned about storytelling? How do you present such a technical subject, but still get widespread appeal? Yeah, what can you share with us?
Okay, this is great. This is actually, it ties into the thing that I forgot earlier, which is that another way that I avoid burnout and continue having fun in my job is I look for ways to make it creative. Like I look for ways to reconnect with the version of me that was making videos that didn't get any views, and I was just making them because it was fun. So like I recently did an advertisement for a VPN company, and like, you could like hear everyone groan in the background, like, oh God, not another VPN ad.
Right.
But I was looking at this like, sheet of things they wanted me to talk about. And it was kind of like, okay, I can make this more fun for everyone involved if I shoot like a skit around it. And so I've been trying to do more of that, trying to do more of these little creative bits in the video, where like I'll shoot like a little skit involved, or I'll try to animate something and fail miserably because I'm really bad at animation. But I think like if you look at it as this like cookie cutter thing, like I am a machine that turns Thai food into videos, like you'll you'll kind of get bored pretty quick. And so trying to look for stuff that you can improve on, or just, I don't know, find something that's like, for me, it's just the creativity of trying to find like a good joke in a video. And I think that also ties into like finding more widespread appeal than just a bunch of engineers. Like I think the majority of the audience doesn't care about rockets. They're sort of there for the journey. And I finding ways to show that you're having fun with it usually translates pretty well. Like I follow tons of people on YouTube, and I'm sure you do too, who do stuff that you have no actual interest in doing, but you follow them because you're like, you're a cool person and clearly very passionate about this, and I want to support that.
Totally,
and that comes through really well.
How do you toe that line then? When do you know this is too much technical stuff to talk about?
It feels like a timer in my head a little bit. I feel like after I've gone really technical for about 30 seconds in a script, or 45 seconds, I have to put something in there that ties you back down to earth, of like, just acknowledging like this is a bunch of technical stuff, and also most of us are just guessing. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's probably a practice thing. It's probably a practice thing. Like I can't think of a good example, but I think it's probably a trial and error thing.
Okay. How much of your videos are you thinking about like tailoring to the algorithm? Like, how much are you
Oh,
tweaking
yeah.
your first 10, 15 seconds so that it's engaging? You listen to like interviews with Mr. Beast, and like
Yeah.
he's got all these like hard set rules for his videos. And like, he talks about tearing apart videos like, well, your first 5 seconds suck. So of course the rest of the video didn't do well. So
Right.
how much have you learned about that, and how much do you actually think about that in the editing process?
I think about it a little bit, but I'm never trying to do the 100% optimized approach. Like Mr. Beast is fascinating in how they choose every single shot for the video. And like it's all, I mean, the edit for that stuff has to be crazy. Like he did this video where he put like 100 people in like these clear boxes, and there's like a camera in every single box. And then there's like 20 camera people floating around. And then there's like big wide cameras, and like the how he chooses every single shot, and I'm sure it's just a whole team of people now, but that's a really fascinating thing to me. I think a little bit about the intro for a video in terms of optimizing. I also do that with thumbnails a little bit more now. Like thumbnail and title is horrifyingly important for how well a video does. Uh, and but I feel like the audience can really pick up on when you're trying to do clickbaity stuff. Oh, I have a great way to describe this. So I have a there's this guy William Osman who he makes these like goofy engineering projects, and so I talked to him like 2 years ago, and he told me this thing that was like every YouTube channel has two types of videos, and they're either pillar videos or community videos. So a pillar video stands on its own, and its goal is to be Mr. Beast. Like its goal is to, if that video comes across your like suggested tab on YouTube, it you'll be drawn to click on it because of the title and thumbnail, but it also doesn't matter if you know who made the video. If you don't know the person at all, that video can still stand on its own. It's a pillar. And then there's a community video. So like all these like little tutorial videos that I've done about making the solid rocket motor, I don't expect a random person to click on one of those and just enter at episode 4. And that's a community video. That's for the people who already follow the project, and I'm like supporting the community through that type of thing. So it's helpful to define which videos are which. Like EBDB is a little bit of a pillar video. I did a video like a couple of years ago about launching a model rocket out of a silo, and that's like a big pillar video where you don't have to know anything about me. And so I think really hard about the first few seconds in those videos. But for the solid rocket motor stuff that's community based, it's way more about like, I'm going to present a bunch of information and it'll get the views that it gets.
I really like that. I've never heard that, but it makes sense because it's kind of how TV shows are run too.
Yeah.
Like a drama, like NCIS or whatever, or CSI. It's like a lot of these episodes could stand on their own, and then there's like the through line for the community that like is like watching them sequentially. So
Yeah.
it makes
Yeah.
sense that it would work on YouTube too.
And I've been trying to do that too with the stuff that we're doing with the space shot rocket. Like most of these videos at this point, I'm trying to tie it back to the space shot to show you like the reason we're doing this is ultimately because it helps us in XYZ with the space shot.
So, how much more difficult and expensive is a space shot versus like the EBDB? Like, what are we talking about in terms of time and engineering and money difference there?
It's hard to know because I haven't done it. I'm sort of shooting in the dark. And I would also say that I'm not doing it in the cheapest or easiest way possible. First and foremost, a space shot is about glory. And like, it's kind of funny. It's also true. It's a vanity project. Like, I'm not going to discover any new scientific data by going above 100 kilometers that hasn't already been found out. So we're here because we want to do something cool. And that's pretty much it. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. There's this guy, Kip, who flew to, I think it was like 90 kilometers, 95 kilometers last October. And he did it with what I would estimate to be, I can't even speculate on cost, but he built some custom motors. It was a 4.5-inch booster and a 3-inch diameter sustainer, and like a second stage basically. And like that's a totally viable route to go, but he could only loft about a can of beer to to that high, and like that's his payload capacity and size. And I want to fly like this. I want to fly like 40 cameras into space that are all looking everywhere, and so it has to be a lot more complex and expensive that way. In terms of how much more complicated it is, I think it has mostly to do with the ability to find the rocket afterward. So you can't, you're not going to be able to spot the rocket coming down. You're going to have really good telemetry and like a very strong connection to the computers on board in order to find it. And then the other recovery is really hard because deploying your parachutes at 50,000 feet, you have a little bit of air to work with to inflate the parachutes. And that keeps you from tangling in all of the like various lines and things like that that come out of the rocket. In space, there's no air, which is obvious, and there's no air for a long time. So you have a huge window where you can tangle up your parachutes, and that's a hard problem. And then I think maybe the biggest one that I'm afraid of is speed. The rocket has to go really fast, and so you think about ablative nose cones where the nose cone burns away to manage heat, like little bit by bit, and then keeping your fins attached is also challenging.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, so
just seeing like the stuff that you've had to deal with on much slower rockets and then scaling that up seems like it's going to be a big challenge for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to really accurately answer that question because I don't know what I don't know right now. What I do know is that holy Moses, it's like getting very expensive. Well, it's I don't think it's worth getting into like actual figures, but it's not. I think I'm looking at it a little bit as like, most of my friends are buying houses or trying to buy a house, and I'm like trying to go to space, and like that's sort of the scale that we're thinking on.
Oh man, yeah, I can only imagine. That's rough.
And I'm funding it by shilling VPNs.
I mean, the Insta360 one seemed like a cool sponsorship. Those cameras are actually, I mean, I think everybody released videos on those things on the same day because of the embargo, but they actually seemed like a pretty cool camera outside of sponsorship. So,
and they were great to work with too. I was not sure they were going to be cool with me showing their damaged camera. Like the whole goal of the video was to be like a big product release for them, and I damaged their camera pretty bad. And I thought they were going to be like, no, you have to cut that part out. But they were really cool about it. So it's fun to work with brands that are pretty chill about that stuff.
Yeah, I bet. Last question. Backyard Engineer asked, what advice do you have for individuals looking to pivot their career similar to what you did and get more involved in aerospace?
I think it's a little bit similar to, I think I said this earlier, but like taper it is what I would say. Like there's so much stuff that you can do while still maintaining the job that you currently have or the place that you're currently in. And it gets really frustrating. Like it got very frustrating for me to continue shooting weddings when I was trying to transition into aerospace and rocketry and things like that, because it just felt like a total waste of time. And it wasn't. It was important to keep trying to do good work and keep showing up because it is like a smaller world than you think. And people will notice if you're phoning it in, which sucks, but it is definitely true. I'm trying to think if I have any other good advice. Changing fields is really scary, but you'll be glad that you did it, I'm pretty sure. Like if you have the urge to change fields, you probably owe it to yourself to try.
Are there any resources that you've come across that you think are very valuable outside of just YouTube?
YouTube is a big one. I think people, it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but people are like the greatest resource. If finding someone who can help guide you through, like, if you're trying to apply for a job in aerospace, having an in with someone at a company, it's the same type of thing as before. Knowing a friend of a friend is really powerful. And that's often how like your resume gets to the top of a pile. It doesn't guarantee you a job, but like guaranteeing you an interview is a big leg up. So yeah, making friends and making it clear to those friends like you want to move in this direction helps you a lot, I think, in expanding your network.
So did you just start going to like rocketry club meetings?
Yeah.
Just like, okay, I'm here. I don't know anything. Let's talk.
No, really. I mean, that's really what I did. I also did like meetup.com. I would try to find like aerospace related things in Boston. I got to meet Will Pomerantz, who's like he was in charge for Virgin Orbit for a while, but he was like the CEO, and he took time to like speak to me at this event when I had no experience. And having little bits of like interactions like that, going to conferences if you can afford to get yourself out there, made a big difference for me. And it's so cringe to realize that like networking is actually important, but it is.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Well, that brings me on to shop news and new things. You've already mentioned the new lathe. Anything else new or exciting in your world?
I am buying a lot of phenolic, a lot of a lot of phenolic and a lot of aluminum, and I hope to turn it into rockets. That's the big news right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the timeline looking like on your space shot? When are you hoping to actually go for it?
I think realistically it will probably happen 2025. I want it to happen next year. And I'm working toward it happening next year, which means it will probably happen 2025. And we'll see how things pan out. There's tons of work to do, and like there will be tons of videos in between. So also lots of flights in between. Like before we do anything to space, we're going to fly to like 50,000 feet, then 100,000, 150. It's not, there's some value in like doing a lot of incremental testing. And a lot of it is just proving out the system. So like there's avionics stuff that changes when you're in space and you can't radiate heat away, or you can't convect heat away from your flight computer. Not meaningfully over the course of a few minutes, but yeah, I think 2025 is somewhat realistic.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that brings me to the last two questions I ask every guest every week. First of which is, what did you research this week? Doesn't have to be manufacturing related or rocket related. It's just always interesting to hear what interesting people are researching.
That is a great question. I am spending my week thinking a lot about GPS. So I've had GPS issues on a lot of my rockets. And what I mean by issues is that I set up the rocket in my backyard and it can see a bunch of GPS satellites. It gets a good connection. It can find our latitude, longitude. And then I get out to the launch site and I set it up on the launch pad and it sees nothing. And it blows my mind every time. And it makes me so mad. So I'm going out to the launch site that I usually use to help a friend this weekend, but I'm bringing a bunch of spectrum analysis equipment because I'm so convinced. I'm like a dude with a tinfoil hat right now learning about GPS. I'm so convinced that I'm going to like find, I don't know, I'm going to find like an alien life form or something. But yeah, that's my whole week has been researching GPS.
Yeah, I found that so bizarre. I mean, it was terrible watching your most recent video, and it's like, oh yeah, I had this spot tracker, and it's just like on its own, like,
Yep.
not in the rocket anymore. Cool, I found it though.
I mean, yeah, the spot tracker did what it needed to do. It reported its location. It just separated from the rocket.
Yeah, that's crazy. The second question I ask every guest is, what are the things you're working on to be a better person, leader, what have you? None of us are perfect. We're all working on stuff. What's yours?
Wow, great question. I'll mention again, physical exercise has been a really big thing, both for mental health and also just like self-confidence. It's a big deal to feel like you're making progress in that regard. I wish I read more. I used to read a lot, and that I would like to pick that up again. But I think right now, what am I working on to become a better person? It's probably taking care of my body better.
I think that is an excellent one to communicate, because I completely agree. I, as a business owner, go through big swings of like super into it, and then I'm way too busy to like even eat properly.
And just take out every night,
It's really, really tough. But like you said, you feel so much better when you actually are taking care of yourself. Like it's such a mental, it's such a like a mind fuck that you're like, I know the right thing to do to make myself feel better, and then I'm like so against doing it half the time.
Yeah. I and it makes me better in way more ways than are immediately obvious. Like obviously you get more in shape and it helps your mental health, but it makes me a better friend. It makes me a better like person in my immediate family to like support them. It makes me, I think, just more conscious of like people around me. I don't know. It has like all of these follow-on effects that you forget are there until you're doing it and you're like, oh yeah, this is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that because you become so practiced at doing something you don't want to do, things in life become so much easier or feel so much easier. Like it's everything that anybody else asks you is so much less of an ask because you're so practiced and doing things that you really don't want to do.
Yeah, I
Uh,
totally agree with that.
yeah.
I
Well,
also hate whoever invented the rowing machine. They deserve to be in federal prison.
or just rowing for the rest of their
Oh my God,
lives.
it's awful. It's really good for you, but at what cost?
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been really great to get to know you a little more. And like I said before we started, get to have a conversation with someone that I hear so much in my headphones. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dylan.
My pleasure. Thank you to all the Patreon members who make the show possible. And thank you all for listening. I will be back next week.